It is 48 BC, and a wave of scholars crowds the marble steps of the Mausoleum, unaware they are witnessing the first breath of a tragedy that will stretch for 300 years. The sun beats down on the bustling harbor of Alexandria, a city built on reclaimed sand and the ambition of Alexander the Great. Merchants hawk fragrant spices, the scent of cumin and myrrh mingling with the brine of the Mediterranean, while a distant clang of shipyard hammers marks the pulse of a port that feeds the empire. In the shade of the great library, a handful of scribes unroll papyrus scrolls, their ink still wet, their words a living bridge between Euclid and the poets of Sappho. The Mausoleum, founded by Ptolemy I Soter in the early 3rd century BC, was more than a building, it was a state-sponsored think tank where philosophers, astronomers, and mathematicians were granted stipends to pursue knowledge. Its walls housed the famed library, a repository that, according to contemporary accounts, collected works from many corners of the Hellenistic world. Ships arrived bearing papyrus scrolls from various regions, and other writing materials such as leather-bound codices, reflecting the diversity of the empire's scholarship. The air inside smelled of ink, drying plaster, and the faint, sweet odor of papyrus that had been soaked in the Nile's floodwaters. In this golden age, the library was a living organism. Librarians, who oversaw the collection, catalogued each acquisition, often copying texts to preserve them against the inevitable decay of the papyrus fibers. According to later legend, Demetrius of Phalerum is said to have ordered that any book found on foreign ships be seized and copied, though no contemporary decree survives to confirm the story. Yet, even as the shelves swelled, political currents began to stir. The first tremor came with Julius Caesar's siege of Alexandria in 48 BC. Historical narratives describe how Caesar, pursued by Pompey's forces, set fire to his own ships to block the harbor. The flames leapt toward the docks, and a gust of wind carried embers toward the quarter of the city that housed the library. Contemporary witnesses note a sudden blaze that illuminated the night, but the extent of the damage remains debated. Some scholars argue that only a peripheral wing was scorched, while others suggest that a portion of the stored scrolls was lost. What is clear is that the incident introduced a pattern, the library's vulnerability to the collateral damage of war. After Caesar's departure, the Ptolemaic dynasty continued to patronize the institution. Under Ptolemy II Philadelphus, the library reached its zenith, attracting scholars like the mathematician Euclid, whose element would later become the foundation of geometry. The walls of the reading rooms echoed with debate on the nature of the heavens, while the scent of oil lamps burned steadily through the night, casting a golden glow over the scholars' faces. The library's catalogue, the famed Pinarches, listed, according to sources, thousands of works, organized by subject and author, a proto-library system that would influence later European repositories. But the stability of the Ptolemies was fragile. The death of Cleopatra VII in 30 BC and the annexation of Egypt by Rome marked the end of the Hellenistic patronage model. Roman governors, more concerned with taxation and military logistics, treated the library as a convenient storage space rather than a sacred sanctuary. Documents from the early imperial period record that some Roman officials repurposed rooms for administrative offices, and that occasional requisitioning of papyrus for official correspondence reduced the collection's integrity. The library, once a beacon of open inquiry, began to feel the weight of bureaucratic indifference. The second major shock arrived under the reign of Emperor Aurelian in the mid-3rd century AD. Aurelian's campaigns to reunify the fractured empire led him to Alexandria, a city that had become a hotbed of dissent. Historical accounts describe a siege in which Aurelian's forces stormed the city walls, and in the chaos, the imperial garrison set fire to the palace district. While the palace burned, the library, situated nearby, suffered from smoke inhalation and ash fallout. Some archaeological layers in the ruins of the Mausoleum show soot, suggesting exposure to intense heat, but linking this directly to Aurelian's siege remains a matter of scholarly debate. Scholars agree that this event marked a turning point. The library was no longer merely a target of accidental fire, it became a collateral casualty of empire-wide power struggles. Yet the slow death of the library was not solely the result of flames. a more insidious process unfolded over centuries as successive regimes re-evaluated the role of pagan knowledge. By the late 4th century, Christianity had become the state religion, and the theological climate shifted dramatically. Church fathers, wary of pagan philosophy, issued edicts that discouraged the study of certain texts. The famous decree of Theophilus, the Patriarch of Alexandria, in 391 AD, ordered the demolition of the Serapeum, the temple that, according to some sources, may have housed part of the library's collection. Contemporary chroniclers describe the demolition as a public spectacle, with stone blocks crashing and dust rising like a shroud over the city. While the Serapeum's destruction is well documented, the exact number of scrolls lost in the demolition remains unknown. What is documented, however, is that the act symbolized a broader cultural purge. Scholars who once roamed the library's halls were now forced to abandon their work or risk persecution. The third beat of the library's decline came from economic neglect. As the Roman economy faltered, funding for the library's upkeep evaporated. Papyrus, a costly commodity sourced from the Nile's marshes, became scarce. Records from the 5th century mention that the remaining custodians resorted to recycling older scrolls to produce new copies, a practice known as palimpsesting. This recycling, while preserving fragments of earlier works, also meant that entire texts vanished beneath newer layers of ink. The tactile feel of a freshly scraped parchment, the faint scent of old vellum, became a reminder that the library was being stripped piece by piece. Mid-story, a pivotal revelation reshapes the narrative. The most devastating blows were not the dramatic fires that capture popular imagination, but the systematic, bureaucratic dismantling of the library's purpose. Scholars now understand that the institution's decline was driven by a cascade of administrative decisions: requisitioning of papyrus for tax records, repurposing of rooms for military barracks, and the deliberate suppression of pagan scholarship. Each decree, each budget cut, each act of cultural censure contributed to a slow erosion that no single blaze could match. This turn forces us to re-examine the myth of the Great Fire and recognize the library's death as a protracted, intentional process. The final act unfolds in the early 7th century, when the Arab conquest of Egypt reshaped the region's political landscape. Arab chroniclers note that the new rulers found the former library site in ruins, its once glorious halls reduced to a heap of stone and sand. Some accounts claim that the conquerors ordered the remaining books to be burned, yet modern historians caution that such reports are likely exaggerated, stemming from later polemics. What is certain is that by this time, the core of the library's collection had already been dispersed, hidden, or destroyed over centuries of neglect. The last known custodians, a small group of monks in a modest scriptorium, copied whatever fragments they could find, preserving a whisper of the original treasure for future generations. The haunting aftermath lingers in the modern imagination. Scholars today can only glimpse the library through references in other works, a quotation here, a fragment cited there. The loss is not merely numeric, it is the disappearance of entire intellectual traditions, of scientific treatises on optics that could have accelerated technological progress, of philosophical dialogues that might have altered the course of Western thought. The emptiness of the library's void is felt in every field that once flourished under its roof. As we stand amid the dust-covered ruins of the Mausoleum, a question reverberates across time: if the scrolls of Alexandria had survived, would the world have taken a different path toward knowledge, reason, and invention? The answer remains buried beneath centuries of ash, bureaucracy, and silence, inviting each new generation to wonder what might have been.